Sales of the General Motors Company, GMC, declined starting in about 2000 because the firm had difficulty competing with rivals offering more fuel-efficient cars. GM was hit hard by the recession of 2007 to 2009 and declared bankruptcy in 2009. A restructured GM soon emerged with a focus on increasing sales in foreign markets. By 2013, GM was selling more cars in China than in the United States. From 1949 until the late 1970s, China was a centrally planned communist economy, and the country experienced little economic growth. China moved away from a centrally planned economy in 1978 and experienced growth of real per capita GDP of 7.63% annually between 1979 and 1990, 9.27% per year from 1990 to 2000, 9.87% from 2000 to 2010, and 7.51% per year from 2010 to 2014. Growth is slowing, but is still gaining for the country overall. But China is not a democracy, and the Chinese government has failed to fully establish the rule of law, particularly in respect to the consistent enforcement of property rights. GM has been cautious when bringing its latest technology to China for fear that its intellectual property will be stolen.
Okay, now this. General Motors will import Buicks that have been made in China, and they're going to be imported to the United States. And look who is here to comment on this, automotive editor Gary Gastilow. Now, these shipments of Chinese-made Buicks...
Still unconfirmed, just to make that
unconfirmed?
clear. Yeah, no.
But highly likely.
Looks like it's going to happen.
Your sources say it's going to happen.
Right.
When do they come?
It probably happen within a year or two if it does kick off. This rumor first surfaced back in August. Look, General Motors makes a lot of cars in China, sells a lot of cars there. It's got excess volume. It'd be pretty easy to knock out 40 or 50,000 cars and send them to the United States.
Are they price competitive in the United States?
They will be, I'm sure. And that's the thing. They'll save a lot of money making them over there. The profit margins are going to be better. Now, listen, Volvo's already selling Chinese-made cars in the United States.
Oh.
They started this year. They were the first. Drove it recently. As far as I could tell, it was exactly the same as the ones made in Sweden.
How about this one? Chevy and GMC, they're both coming out with diesel-powered pickup trucks that get over 30 miles to the gallon on the highway. Is that a breakthrough?
31 miles a gallon. This would be the most fuel-efficient pickup trucks ever. This is their mid-sized trucks, which have been a huge success this year. They've been out of that segment for a couple of years. They came back. They're going to sell over 100,000 of them in the United States this year. It's likely now we're hearing that Ford's going to re-enter that segment as well. Chrysler's been out of it for a while, though. It's been a big success. People are very excited about these diesels. Not going to save you a lot of money, though. They cost $3,700 more than the regular gas-powered V6s, and they're only going to save you about $100 a year on fuel prices. But people like diesel trucks because of the towing capabilities and just the overall performance. I drove it. I really did enjoy it. It'd be nice if that price was a little closer to the regular vehicles, but I think they are going to sell well. Figure about 10% of the volume of the trucks.
All right, Gary Gastilow, you know what you're talking about. We appreciate that. Thank you very much, Gary.
In economics, economic growth or economic growth theory typically refers to growth of potential output, that is, production at full employment. This assumes the country has an established economic structure with rule of law, private property rights, and a financial infrastructure. In this chapter, we study the economic development process in the U.S. and with our trading partners. No sustained economic growth occurred between 1 million BC and 1300 AD. Significant growth did not begin until the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution refers to the application of mechanical power to the production of goods, beginning in England around 1750. Before that time, production of goods had relied almost exclusively on human or animal power. First England, and then other countries, experienced long-run economic growth with sustained increases in real GDP per capita. The Industrial Revolution sprouted in response to the Glorious Revolution, also called the Bloodless Revolution of 1688 in England. The British king passed administrative control of the banking system and property rights control to the British Parliament. These events synergistically established a trend of economic growth in Europe. It started as small growth, but because of compounding in the long run, Small differences in economic growth rates result in big differences in living standards. The world's average annual growth rate of real GDP per capita in the period of 1800 to 1900 was about 1.3% and equaled 2.3% from 1900 to 2000. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has estimated that the real gross domestic product in 2009 prices of the United States in 1929 was $1,055.6 billion. The Industrial Revolution and its subsequent spread throughout the world resulted in sustained increases in real GDP per capita. Growth rates matter because an economy that grows too slowly fails to raise the living standards. In some countries in Africa and Asia, very little economic growth has occurred in the past 50 years, resulting in severe poverty. Remember the rule of 70 to apply to a couple growth rates, like 1.3% and 2.3%, to see the time needed to double the average standard of living in a country. Even a little rate increase makes a substantial reduction in the time needed to double the GDP per capita. The world can be divided into two groups, the high-income countries, or the industrialized countries, and the poorer countries, or developing countries. The high-income countries include Western Europe, Australia, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, and the United States. The developing countries include most of the countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In the 1980s and 1990s, a small group of countries, mostly East Asian countries such as Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, experienced high growth rates and are referred to as the newly industrialized countries. Income equality between countries is often sought as developing nations grow larger and increase the difference between the developed and developing countries. However, there are still undeveloped countries not yet engaged in the globalization thrust. These differences are evident when comparing developed European countries like Germany to undeveloped sub-Saharan African countries. Disparity can also be seen when comparing cultural groups within the USA and Canada based on Aboriginal cultures when compared to other cultural origin groups. Although average income per person in each group may be substantially different, advances in healthcare, educational enhancements, and rule of law have generally improved substantially. Although that does not mean it is uniform or doesn't mean that it is consistently applied. The economic growth model explains growth rates in real GDP per capita over the long run. This model focuses on the causes of long-run increases in labor productivity, which is the quantity of goods and services that can be produced by one worker or by 1 hour of work. Economists believe that two key factors determine labor productivity: the quantity of capital per hour worked and the level of technology. Technological change is a change in the quantity of output a firm can produce using a given quantity of inputs. There are three main sources of technological change. 1. Better machinery and equipment. 2. Increases in human capital, which is the accumulated knowledge and skills that workers acquire from education and training or from their life experiences. 3. Better means of organizing and managing production. A country's standard of living will be higher the more capital workers have available on their jobs. The better the capital, the more human capital workers have, and the better the job business managers can do when organizing production. This model of economic growth is more than just words. It is a foundational change to how you, an entrant into the professional job market, can enter the marketplace as someone who does more than work faster and with increased accuracy. You can find ways to adopt different technologies into your personal production function. This concept is a game changer in many people's minds. Growth is not just about new technologies introduced by business into their operations. It requires employees knowing how to use the technologies. I have seen companies that spend thousands of dollars to purchase geographical information system software, integrate servers and desktop computers with wide format printers so they could embrace the new technologies. But when it came time to deploy these spatial analysis tools in the workplace, they had one person able to run the software. This can create a bunker complex to create a wall around this staff member who would not release the data accumulated to coworkers or even to clients. When that worker finds other employment, the company is left without the human capital needed to leverage the expensive data into value for the company. Does this sound ridiculous to you? Trust me, it is absurd, but it is also a reality. There are too few professionals entering the workforce today with single specialty focus. Broadened specialization means more preparation work, but potentially more rewards. The economic growth model can be illustrated by using the per-worker production function, the relationship between real GDP per hour worked and capital per hour worked, holding the level of technology constant. Increases in the quantity of capital per hour worked result in movements up along the per-worker production function. Holding technology constant, equal increases in the amount of capital per hour worked lead to diminishing increases in output per hour worked. Consider this line as a new entrant into the technology starts in the lower left side of the chart. New skills are learned, techniques are refined, and the process of becoming more and more efficient is embraced. The worker moves along the line in a right and upward progression. This is what most people do as they enter the workforce. You can see this clearly for someone working at a job doing house painting with brushes and rollers. The first house painted took a lot of time to get the use of the tools right. Then, as more houses were completed, efficiency increased, and eventually the per-worker production function leveled out. Leveling out means simply that using the technologies available, that additional worker efficiency improvements are not likely. This is diminishing returns. Technological change helps economies avoid diminishing returns to capital. Technological change shifts up the per-worker production function and allows an economy to produce more real output per hour worked with the same quantity of capital per hour worked. In the long run, a country will experience an increasing standard of living only if it experiences continuing technological change and human capital capable of adopting it and using it. This is where workers enhancing their personal production function are enabled. That house painter may consider using a spray applicator to speed the job, or different scaffolding devices to access the worksite. The painter may consider changes to the siding materials necessitating fewer layers of paint, or select a different compound to use when painting. Each technological change in the operation introduced a new production function the worker moved up to.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
As the Soviet Union grew rapidly from 1920 through the 1950s, it went through a process of adoption of new technologies. Some were deployed within the country, and others were brought from the USA and Europe. Because of the economic system of the USSR, employees were engaged through managed work programs, while entrepreneurs were stifled. Domestically created new technologies bypassed the Soviet system. Their economy was anchored on crude oil and gas extraction to sell to Europe, where it was processed into usable products. Within the USSR, the raw national endowments of oil and gas were not processed into final products. No value added was enabled. Only a small portion of the nation's people were engaged in the industry, and the national government was the beneficiary of the proceeds from extraction. National emphasis on roads and bridges, electricity and clean water supplies was minimal. When oil and gas prices dropped in the 1980s and 90s, the Soviet Union became insolvent and collapsed. New growth theory is a model of long-run economic growth that emphasizes that technological change is influenced by economic incentives and so is determined by the working of the market system. Paul Romer, who developed the new growth theory, argues that the rate of technological change is influenced by how individuals and firms respond to economic incentives. Firms add to an economy's stock of knowledge capital when they engage in research and development or otherwise contribute to technological change. Romer argues that the accumulation of knowledge capital is subject to diminishing returns at the firm level, but at the level of the entire economy, knowledge capital is subject to increasing returns. The use of knowledge capital is non-rival because one firm's use of that knowledge does not prevent another firm from also using it. Romer points out that firms are unlikely to engage in research and development up to the point where the marginal cost of the research equals the marginal return from the knowledge gained because other firms will gain much of the marginal return. Government policy can increase the accumulation of knowledge capital in three ways. First, protecting intellectual property with patents and copyrights. A patent is the exclusive right to produce a new product for a period of 20 years from the date the patent is applied for. Second, subsidizing research and development. Third, subsidizing education. These policies can bring the accumulation of knowledge capital closer to the optimal level. Research and development costs companies and individuals time and money. Not all R&D is funded by the government, and when it is articulated into a new product, the creators are protected by laws to ensure it. Patents and copyrights are fundamental protections bestowed on U.S. companies and residents. This enables creativity and allows inventors to benefit from their creations. Sometimes governments fund R&D activities, and this is generally through universities or targeted direct contracts. It can also be granted as tax incentives. Mostly, R&D is enhanced by making the science a part of college and university training. Many U.S. educational institutions are partially funded by the federal government and states, with the benefit seen as increases of technology development in the country and as increased wages of trained employees. The new growth theory has revived interest in the ideas of Joseph Schumpeter, who developed a model of growth that emphasized his view that new products drive older products and the firms that produce them out of the market. For Schumpeter, the key to rising living standards is the development of new products that meet consumer needs in qualitatively different ways. Successful entrepreneurs can use their profits to finance the development of new products. In my professional career, starting in forestry, I have been a proponent of technological changes necessitating workers to adopt their use. New technologies need people who understand their use and are able to implement them. It was seen at the macro scale of timber extraction, and at the micro scale as navigation in the forest was facilitated by government-produced maps of where roads and sections were located, then to using GIS programs to model topographic lines, streams, and road networks, ultimately to create these maps as needed, with topographic relief on printed paper and on portable communication devices. Tools of the trade changed from the staff compass to a handheld compass, and from steel tape rolls to a hip-mounted distance-measuring string box. These were replaced with global positioning system units, a GPS accepting data from satellites to determine position on the ground and carried by field staff working in the forest. Each new unit opening new possibilities to increase worker productivity. As each new product release was made, the previous model was made obsolete. Creative destruction. Employees are always challenged to stay on top of the evolving technologies to be able to extract value from its newest technological introduction. Upward movements on the personal production functions. Whether we talk about the forest management sector or any other industry, it is imperative you identify movement up from one level of your personal production function to the next higher level. A person may be able to perform on the far right side of the production function 1 curve, only to be surpassed by someone capable of performing at introductory levels on the next level up, or the one higher than that. Progressive adoption of the technology is what makes efficiency valuable to the benefit of the person, the company, and the nation. It can be frustrating for the businesses to strive to keep employees on the cutting edge of technology adoption. Some have called it staying on the bleeding edge. As an economist, you can identify how to deploy the right technology for the right job. That means the most accurate GPS unit costing $10,000 and requiring a highly trained technician to operate it is not justified on the job to make a road layout proposed line survey. The $150 GPS used for several years already can do the job fine. On the other hand, implementing advanced spatial analysis techniques for a water flow management device costing tens of thousands of dollars may be justified on the basis of avoiding flooding and washout costs, and even the risk imposed to people living in the threat zone if wrong decisions are implemented. Of course, knowing which decision is best deployed means the manager has the understanding of each level of enhanced technology and is willing to implement it. Productivity in the United States grew rapidly from the end of World War II until the mid-1970s. Growth then slowed down for 20 years. Beginning in the mid-1990s, the growth rate picked up again, although it remained below the levels achieved during most of the 20th century. Some economists believe that productivity only appeared to slow down because of the difficulty of accurately measuring productivity, especially for the production of services. Other economists blame the productivity slowdown on the educational system, which may have left workers ill-trained for the jobs that were created during this time period. However, economists have not reached a consensus on why the productivity slowdown took place. Some economists believe that the development of a new economy based on information technology, IT, caused the higher productivity growth that began in the 1990s. Faster data processing has had a major effect on nearly every firm. Many economists believe that measured growth rates have understated the actual growth of the U.S. economy. Other economists are skeptical about the ability of the economy to sustain high rates of productivity growth. These economists doubt that the unmeasured benefits of the IT revolution are any greater than the unmeasured benefits of earlier innovations. Personally, I believe there has been a reduction in the level of productivity in part because of the shift in focus by companies responding to how the U.S. economy has transitioned from a manufacturing-based economy to a services-based economy. Of course, the transition is not en masse. It is only a partial shift of focus. This shift has given more attention to the development of a new feature for a smartphone used for personal edification than it has to increasing capabilities of data processing or econometric design deployment used for business production. Today's high school graduate is much more likely to be able to discover the best route on a smartphone to get from home to a concert, and that same graduate is able to identify the conditions that make that route the best option. New technology adoption is a challenge for many people. I have interacted with many managers of my generation who will not consider the newest technologies, even when shown how it can improve their business operations and profitability. The newest technologies are passed over. This filters through their organizations because that is what the management is doing, so it must be right. Again, I urge you to think like an economist and consider the best options for yourself. Then make it happen. The economic growth model tells us that economies grow when the quantity of capital per hour worked increases and when technological change takes place. The profitability of using additional capital, or better technology, is generally greater in a developing country than in a high-income country. The economic growth model predicts that poor countries will grow faster than rich countries. Catchup is the prediction that the level of GDP per capita, or income per capita, in poor countries will grow faster than in rich countries. The paradox is that lower-income industrial countries have been catching up to the higher-income industrial countries. But the developing countries as a group have not been catching up to the high-income countries as a group. It is a process of change. A graph can be used to illustrate whether a catch-up is happening. The initial level of GDP per capita is measured along the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis shows the rate at which GDP per capita is growing. Low-income countries should be in the upper left part of the graph, and high-income countries should be in the lower right part of the graph. Some countries that had low levels of real GDP per capita in 1960s had lower levels of real GDP per capita in 2010 than in 1960. Other countries that started with low levels of real GDP per capita grew rapidly. Over the past 20 years, other high-income countries have fallen further behind the United States. Real GDP per capita in Canada, Japan, and the 5 largest countries in Western Europe increased relative to the United States between 1960 and 1990, but none of these countries has experienced catch-up since 1990. Many economists believe that there are 2 explanations for the failure of these countries to catch up with the United States: the greater flexibility of U.S. labor markets and the greater efficiency of the U.S. financial system. The U.S. labor markets have developed, through trial and error, into an efficient system allowing businesses flexibility to make decisions in their best financial interests. This sometimes means releasing workers to recruit new ones better equipped to implement new technologies, or even to develop them. Other countries have much stronger government involvement in the abilities of companies to make the ultimate decisions about worker longevity with a firm and even the acceptable pay level. This is also seen in the USA, with workers entering the workforce sooner, while still in high school, and leaving the workforce later, sometimes starting a new career after retiring from another. This series of events can seem impossible to citizens of other countries who may be accustomed to spending their entire career working for the same employer, then retiring once and for all. This is not alien in the USA either, at least not a couple generations ago. My grandfather lived through the Great Depression and worked for one employer his entire career. My father entered an apprenticeship program as machinist for the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard and received training and experiences to promote him to the head of the nuclear engineering program for the U.S. Navy. He spent 41 years working for that one employer until his retirement. He never re-entered the workforce after that. The realities of today's USA workforce is quite different and continues to evolve. Some poor countries do not experience rapid growth for 4 main reasons. First, failure to enforce the rule of law, which is the ability of government to enforce the laws of the country, particularly with respect to protecting private property and enforcing contracts. Second, wars and revolutions. Third, poor public education and health. And fourth, low rates of saving and investment. Property rights are the rights of individuals or firms to sell the exclusive use of their property, including the right to buy or sell it. The rule of law seems to most American students as a compulsory topic of self-gratification to say, "We figured it out." I tell you about it because what we have in the USA in respect to the rule of law is fundamental to our basic business success. I have worked in Latvia, located along the Baltic Sea in Northern Europe. Well, there, I saw that everyone had a personal chauffeur. The chauffeur was not for status reasons, it was because no one could leave their automobile unattended without it being stripped or stolen. Law enforcement was unwilling to even try to prevent automobile theft because it was not their responsibility. Simple protection of a car is one thing, but this hands-off philosophy is extended to the licensed shops in downtown Moscow, Russia, where small businesses were experiencing success and growth. Frustrated by these pesky shop owners' successes, bribes were paid by the big box stores of Moscow to destroy the small businesses taking their business away. Government machines were deployed in downtown Moscow near subway outlets to crush their businesses. I mean literally, to really crush them. The rule of law is touted as the Russian modus operandi, but in practice, the ruble is the controller in power. This night, over 100 shops were demolished in Moscow. Moscow people woke up in completely different-looking cities. A lot of their favorite shops were destroyed. Never before have Moscow authorities demolished so many shops at once. Usually they did it one by one after a court order, but now they demolished them at will. No more court orders are needed due to the new law. Thanks to this, they destroyed over 100 stores on one night.
Bulldozers, bailiffs, and police arrive in Moscow's private residential neighborhood of Rychnik on the night of January 21st to enforce a court order by tearing down 43 houses.
They do what they want. The residents were not warned in advance, as the law requires.
The city has declared the region a protected ecological zone. It says the old Soviet land permits for Rychnik residents are invalid and that their houses must be destroyed.
200 people dressed in black arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning. We don't know whether they were police or riot police. They came, some of our residents were standing outside on the road and some were in their cars. Police started taking people into a police bus and sending them to the police station. The others were taken from their cars.
Police arrest around 20 protesters who are brought to the nearest police station overnight for disorderly conduct during the standoff with the bailiffs.
We were asking the policemen why they did detain us. They answered, for property robbery.
Another man was told that he was detained for dealing drugs, and a woman was accused of prostitution.
As police cordon off the area where houses are being demolished, residents can appeal only to reporters and others to save their homes.
Reasons for slow economic growth are as numerous as the countries experiencing it. Military engagements can initiate new technologies, such as it did for the USA before the start of World War II, because the war was not fought on US soil until Pearl Harbor was bombed. For a country like Ukraine being attacked by the Russian Federation, or Mozambique engaged in a civil war, technological progression is mostly halted, as real estate is destroyed and people killed. Infrastructure development goes beyond roads and bridges to encompass education from grammar school to colleges, healthcare from people's diet to the nation's hospitals, and business success from growing businesses expanding employment to all levels of production, assembly lines to R&D. One way for a developing country to break out of the vicious cycle of low saving and investment and low growth is through foreign investment. Foreign direct investment, FDI, is the purchase or building by a corporation of a facility in a foreign country. Foreign portfolio investment is the purchase by an individual or a firm of stocks or bonds issued in another country. Globalization is the process of countries becoming more open to foreign trade and investment. Developing countries that are more globalized have grown faster than countries that are less globalized. A market system cannot work well unless property rights are enforced. Entrepreneurs are unlikely to risk their own funds, and investors are unlikely to lend their funds to entrepreneurs unless property is safe from being arbitrarily seized. In many developing countries, the rule of law and property rights are undetermined by corruption. Research has shown that countries where corruption is most widespread grow much more slowly than countries where corruption is less of a problem. As people's health improves and they become taller, stronger, and less susceptible to disease, they also become more productive. Many economists believe that government subsidies to education have played an important role in promoting economic growth. The rising incomes that result from economic growth can help developing countries deal with brain drain. Brain drain refers to highly educated and successful individuals leaving developing countries for high-income countries. Government policies that facilitate access to technology are crucial for low-income countries. The easiest way for developing countries to gain access to technology is through foreign direct investment. In high-income countries, government policies can aid the growth of technology by subsidizing research and development. Governments can increase incentives for firms to engage in investment in physical capital by using investment tax credits. These credits allow firms to deduct from their taxes some fraction of the funds they spent on investment. Analysts are perpetually making projections about the standard of living experienced by other countries. The case of Chinese economic development is no stranger to this scenario. Of course, China's economic development will improve the standard of living for people in China. Next year will most likely be better for Chinese people than it was this year. The question of the rate of China's economic development challenges the traditional methods of measuring it when trying to use the tools created to measure open market economies. These tools were applied to the Soviet Union from 1950 through 1980 with little success because the Soviet economic system was plagued by corruption and a national ego pivoting on world domination. The Chinese communist system is different. China has endorsed internal commercial enterprises and opened its markets to direct foreign investment. China manufactures goods for sale on the world market and is the world's largest exporter. China hosts General Motors, a U.S. mega enterprise, to manufacture automobiles in Chinese plants, employing Chinese laborers, and exporting a part of the automobiles it makes while consuming those new vehicles in China. Understanding how communism is strengthened in China through globalization is a new paradigm to challenge everyone. The arguments against further economic growth tend to be motivated either by concern about the effects of growth on the environment or by concern about the effects of the globalization process that has accompanied economic growth in recent years. Economic analysis can contribute to the debate over the consequences of economic growth, but it cannot resolve the issue.